this podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Waël Atallah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. Waël, thank you for willing to join the podcast within, I guess, 90 minutes or maybe even less. Literally a quick exchange on Twitter, and here we are. And I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me because you are, I think, fluent in a subject that I'm really eager to discuss, and we're going to get into this. But also because you're a fan of the podcast, and that makes me happy. And you've kind of you've shared that on Twitter, and we've kind of had this, private exchange. It means a lot that you're listening to the episodes and watching them. Hence, I will give you the benefit of the doubt and sort of encourage you to come on the podcast regularly from now on. We may do 20 episodes together on different subjects. But before we get into all of that, I want to ask you, how are you doing in the middle of this pandemic that is continuing? How are you sort of seeing the news at the moment? I know you're in Montreal, but I'm guessing you're kind of in tune with what's happening, at least south of the border in the US. And just your personal life, given the madness that we've grown accustomed to maybe in 2020 so far. So I ask you this very general question. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing as well as anyone else, I guess. I've been isolated for the past 7-8 weeks. I would go out from time to time just to buy food and things like that. And so it has affected me in that sense. Like, the social life is not there anymore. Human contact is not there anymore. But other than that, it's fine. I'm mentally healthy, I think. We'll see if there are repercussions later, right? But so far, there's no depressions and long crying hours or anything of that sort. But
good. So, but 7 to 8 weeks, you've been more or less alone in Montreal.
Yeah, if it's alone, that's fine, but it's also with social media, so you get all the negative news as well, and everything's amplified. So.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned this from the beginning. Your access to what's happening in the U.S. at the moment, these protests that are sort of sweeping the country, are you in tune via social media mostly? Is it just simply accessing it through your phone and keeping up with what's happening?
Yeah, I've lived 8 years in the U.S. I've studied in the U.S., so I know how things are.
Yeah.
I know how tense encounters with the police can be, regardless of your race. So I can imagine it might be tougher even for certain people. So I kind of have an idea of how things are. But I'm not paying too much attention because opinions are too strong about it, and you have two extremes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's very bad, right? Like, if you go on the comments and read the articles and all of that, it's not a nice place to be. And so I tend to stay out of it, or at least look just at the events from a neutral point of view, or try to have a neutral point of view.
I'm glad you're saying this, and we haven't spoken about this. It's the first time we speak. I feel the same way. I feel like expressing an opinion now, at least through social media, will only amplify the more extremes of the debate. And even if one side may have more justified expression, it still feels like you're only contaminating rather than sort of offering anything beneficial, at least when it comes to social media. And I wonder did that resonate with you in Beirut a few months back, when all that was happening on the streets? All of us were exchanging information on an instant basis. Did you feel the same way, or is it something maybe more personal towards Lebanon, and you can kind of maybe see through that stuff?
No, absolutely not, because And 17 October, I saw things black and white, really, and in that sense. And I know things are never black and white, right? But I felt that the people on the streets have a legitimate demand for change, right? And that was very obvious to me. And to tell you the truth, personally, I don't like violence. I despise violence, even if it's a legitimate violence. Yeah. And so in Beirut, all the demonstrations were very pacific, right?
Yeah, for the most part, absolutely.
For the most part,
yes.
At least the ones I participated in, like even when you were face to face with the army, who were fully armed and things were getting tense, you felt that most of the people who were engaged are kind of mature and know what they're doing. I had that feeling in that. So they would de-escalate when they need to de-escalate. They would kind of negotiate when they needed to negotiate. They weren't this random, throwing Molotov cocktails or whatever. I know that later on these things happen for whatever reason.
Yes.
But at least the ones I participated in were extremely pacific, and that gave me kind of hope that maybe the newer generation is better than mine. Maybe they have shed most of the things that I couldn't shed, maybe. So it was positive in that sense to me, and I saw it black and white, which is, I repeat, it's never the case, right?
And now I know why you're a fan of the podcast. I think without meeting you, I think we see a lot of things eye to eye, and I have that same sort of hesitation when I see, and I don't even know if violence may not be the right word, because I've had people kind of point that out, and I might be wrong here, where at least when it comes to the recent issue in New York, for example, sort of breaking in, looting, or in Beirut, sort of storming a bank and kind of just setting it on fire, that is different than social unrest and civil strife. So I guess maybe there are different ways of interpreting that word on its own, but I still hesitate regardless. When I see it, I see another way as more productive than that sort of act of desperation, especially when the imagery is so familiar. And I think, without you saying it, that's what you're referring to, that you kind of have memories of what violence can do to a society.
Yeah, I mean, it's also counterintuitive in the sense that if you look at the bigger changes in the world, they've come with violence, and I'll use that word because it was violence. If you look at the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution, if you look at the American Revolution, they were bloody, right?
Yes.
And you would find it hard to see a Martin Luther King kind of example or a Gandhi kind of example. I mean, these are not the norms, and for thousands of years, humans lived on violence, right? I mean, we've probably experienced, I mean, when we say we, I'm talking about my generation and not in Lebanon.
Yes.
But usually it was a Pacific world kind of, right? I mean, we came after World War II. It was Cold War. Yeah, yes, there's been like atrocities in parts of the world, but in general, you would think a big chunk of the population didn't see an aggressive world, right? Like in Lebanon, we have a different perspective.
Right.
We've lived the civil war.
Right.
We've seen it face on, but so in that sense, I'm not going to go into semantics, violence, not violence. My ideal would be a pacific change of things, which is probably naive. I'm not sure.
I that's well said, and I'm glad you're kind of starting it off this way by offering what resonates with me, at least in terms of our generation. I think we're both old enough to have that bit of perspective. We know what it's like to live through the Civil War. We also know what any type of violence can do and the consequences. And you kind of took me back to earlier stages of history, the French Revolution, American Revolution. I'm glad you've done both, because that's really the theme of what we're going to talk about. In a way, it's managing a state, trying to find a way forward without without diving into the abyss. And I think that is exactly what happened to Lebanon not that long ago. And 1969, 1970, even though it's before our time, it is recent history. And I reached out to you because I actually saw that you had posted a clip about the Cairo Accord, the Cairo Agreement, pretty much what initiated the structural breakdown of the Lebanese state and sovereignty in its essence. And it's something that I've never seen, I've never witnessed, there's no moment in my life that I actually experienced what it would have been like to live in a sovereign Lebanon. So this is all folklore to me, but it's also not that long ago. And you put up a roughly less than 20-minute sort of clip, and you're narrating the events that I forgot. And there are names you referenced. They're mostly from the 1970s, 1980s. This includes Johnny Abdu. This includes Emil Bustani. Even referencing al-Fidayeen and bringing Arafat back, Fuad Shahab, Gamal Abdel Nasser. These are characters that did not come up during the October, November, December protests in Beirut, but I firmly believe they're still in the background. And I'm guessing that you think of it sort of a similar way, that these are not ghosts only, that they're actually still the issues that were at least tackled 50 years ago and not solved, they're still with us today. And I think there's a lot to explore here. I want to just ask you a sort of like a more immediate question before getting sort of too far back in time. Do you think in 2020 that Lebanon is still facing the same problems it faced 50 years ago? Or is Lebanon today in a very different situation? You can't really link the two together, and they should be seen separately and perhaps challenged separately. I'll just start it off with that kind of broader question, then we can kind of dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any two events similar. So the players are different, the circumstances are different, the internal structure is different, the generation is different, the time is different. So you cannot really say, you cannot really compare, even though in the video I try to make a comparison. And the only comparison that can be made without hesitation is that the central government gave up sovereignty over the territory.
Okay. Yeah.
For whoever it gave that to, right? Today, I see it as given up that right to a political party, to a political and military party, which is represented by Hezbollah. Regardless of what you think of Hezbollah, regardless if you think if it's doing the right thing or not, which can be debatable, right? And there are a big portion of the Lebanese population who think that's the right cause, while another part of the population think this is a complete evil, right? You have that schism. But what you cannot disagree with is that the central government does not have full sovereignty on decision making in any case. And that's like, if you take it from a practical point of view, I can understand in the sense that Hezbollah cannot go talk to the ministers and tell them, we're going to do that operation, we need approval beforehand. Then, it doesn't work like that.
It definitely does not work like that.
Right. So these operations need secrecy. They need independent decision making.
Yeah.
Right. So from that perspective, from the perspective of Hezbollah, the weapon cannot be part of what's being called as under the sovereignty of the government. It doesn't work. For practical reason, you need independence. Okay?
So that kind of independence, is that the common thread here between 1969, 1970, and what we're seeing today? That there's that kind of ability for a group to, in a way, avoid state scrutiny, and that's the common theme? Or is it beyond that there's a regional sort of dynamic similar to what we saw 50 years ago, and it's something that Lebanon cannot cope with? And unfortunately, it coped with it 50 years ago by kind of eventually breaking up and falling apart. I mean, I guess I'm trying to see what exactly is the comparison and what is not. Because I like that you said it.
Yeah, I mean, the parallels can be done in the sense that even Hezbollah, it's known that it has a very close relationship to Iran, if we want to limit it to that, right? The PLO were kind of had that relationship with Abdel Nasser or other people. It wasn't the same relationship.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
Right? It was very different.
Yeah.
But there's always this regional, international player on the scene, right? Let's abstract a little bit and say, okay, Hezbollah is totally independent, does not get weapons, does not get money from Iran. Which is not true, but let's
Right.
go to that abstraction.
Yeah.
There will always be that player, that regional player that would try to influence that weapon, that
Right,
would try to
right.
influence that party, right? It happens with other political parties. All of them have some sort of influences, either from the region or international. The only difference is they don't have the weapons to force their opinion on others, right?
Right. Yes.
Well, in that case, there is. And if we go back to the PLO had that strength to force their opinion on others, right?
Right. Right.
So I'm not sure if it makes, yeah.
No, but it does. But I guess maybe I'm asking it the wrong way. But the inevitable conclusion to the Cairo Agreement was a divided country that armed itself to the point that the state disintegrated and imploded, and the state was the first sort of victim, if you will, that oversight of trying to bring all the groups together and maybe pacify them. In a way, it failed. And in a way, you kind of hint at it at the earlier stages of that. You mentioned Fuad Sheb, and I like that you kind of brought that moment back to life where he's meeting Gamal Abdel Nasser on the border, and they're agreeing to leave Lebanon out of that Arabism, pan-Arabism, and Lebanese nationalism schism. So you have roughly 10 years where it is, in a way, calmed. But then by 1969, 1970, it explodes. And it takes just a few years for the country to freefall. Today, are we seeing that kind of dynamic at play? And I know that 2019, there's no agreement per se. I know that there's no kind of regional understanding that Lebanon will be the battlefield. I know that that's absent. But the circumstances, at least what Lebanon is experiencing, it's very similar. You have a society that's divided, and you have a very tense regional atmosphere, and a sub-state group with weapons. So I guess what maybe I'm asking is it inevitable that Lebanon will end up in the same place it always ends up, which is using violence? Or is this time around something else that we don't necessarily have that threat, at least for the time being?
Yeah, my opinion hinges really on, if you had asked me 6 months ago, I was really hopeful that this is impossible. The new generation didn't experience all of that. They don't have these ideas. But now I'm kind of thinking the opposite, that really it's right there, like the same speech I've seen in the 80s during the Civil War, the same speech I've seen. And it's really hard to call. I mean, the hope is no, but I'm not too optimistic about how things might end up. And really, I don't think anyone could pretend to know how things are going to end up. But we can all agree that it's a very tense, extremely tense moment we are living.
Now, you pointed at, I know these are all unrelated, but they're lining up. And they're lining up at least for the conversation, for this episode. You're adamant that the use of violence is wrong. And you prefer seeing a pacified sort of reaction to any issue, and whether that's a Lebanese issue or an American issue or a Canadian issue or whatever the issue is. So what, if we can sort of revise the events that took place, what would have been the better agreement in 1969 that Lebanon could have avoided a 15-year civil war and a post-war era that we're still trying to come out of? That what are the ingredients, if you will, so that Lebanon does not sort of always continue to disappoint over and over and over? And I think you probably share this sort of sentiment that any hopeful opportunity is usually met with severe consequences and a situation that gets worse over time. And that's not new. That's kind of the Lebanon we grew up with. So what would it take to, whatever the issues are, avoiding violence, and rebuilding a lost state and trying to have that as the common goal.
Can I bring you back a little bit farther than 69?
Take me back all the way. You want to go to the before Christ? We can go before Christ too.
No, that's too
No,
far.
it's too far. Okay.
I think that's, well, actually, it's not too far.
So the Phoenicians.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think the problem in Lebanon, we've always ran on compromises. And as long as these compromises work, we were fine. When these compromises kind of were shaken, we went into violence, we went into discord.
Mm-hmm.
So Georges Nakash was the best to say it, deux négations ne font pas une nation. He said, two negations do not make a nation, and he was criticizing the 43 pact.
Right.
So saying we will not be part of Syria, and at the same time we'll kick the French out. These two negations do not make a nation. You have to really. So
that's a damn shame, because that's the foundation of the country.
Exactly. But the thing is, I'm criticizing in the sense that as Lebanese, we really need to sit down together, and we've been sitting down together for a long time.
Yeah.
But we really need to agree not on a compromise, but be truthful to ourselves and say, okay, what makes that country work? Okay.
Right.
Since I was born, I've never had a single year where there was no conflict.
Exactly.
I was born in the Civil War.
Yes.
It was the Syrian occupation afterwards and the Israeli occupation. The Israelis left in 2000, and then there was the Hariri assassination and all what's left, and the Syrian left, and we didn't sit down. We didn't agree on what Lebanon we want. There was kind of the Lebanese who see Israel as the absolute evil and the Palestinian cause as above anything else, even national interest. And you have a part of the population who say, okay, let's stay out of these conflicts, let's stay out of all of this, and let's concentrate on building a country that we can live in peacefully, and kind of, because the Israeli-Palestinian cause is not going to end.
But I'm just going to interrupt you here. Sure. I'm glad you're pointing at something I've never heard before, which is enough of compromise. It's not working. I'd never heard anyone kind of say it that way. And you're reminding me about recent attempts at even reaching a compromise that don't stick. And that could be the Doha Agreement in 2008, which sort of, it lasted, if you will, just maybe a few months, maybe a year. You have the Ba'abda Declaration 2012 that never took off. So even when you're saying in a way that we've been sitting together maybe too long, but even when we do sit together, it's not like we're coming to a real agreement that works regardless. So it's almost like a wasted time at trying to compromise.
Yeah, now I believe we have better ingredients than we had in 43. I believe most of the Lebanese, I hope most of the Lebanese agree that Lebanon is a final entity. And that's the entity we want to live in. There's no more, I hope there's no more thinking that, okay, we're part of something else. Right. So at least that's better than what we had in 43. We were all born in Lebanon. We've all lived in this country. That's what we've known, right? And we kind of agree that, okay, this is it. Now, how can... Yeah, go ahead.
But you're right. That's a very slow shift,
extremely slow shift.
Maybe it's so slow.
And that can be compromised. I've seen lately that there are people asking for partition. There are people asking for being part of a bigger entity. They might be extremes, but if you let these extremes creep in, then you never know what you're gonna get. Because in the Lebanese Civil War, I'm not sure if you remember, but it was like probably 5% of the population that was fighting. 95% of the population had nothing to do with it, right?
Sure.
So you don't need consensus. You just need arms and a political opinion, and you can create chaos in that sense.
But let me ask you, because you're making me think now out loud a bit, and I'm curious. The compromise, is compromise Lebanon's biggest curse in a sense that even the Cairo Agreement is meant to kind of alleviate tension, but it just leads to violence. So that compromise in itself does not yield peace in Lebanon, it yields war.
I don't think it yields war in itself. but it kind of patches the problem until it explodes. So you're not facing the problem heads on. You're kind of saying, okay, we have this huge problem. Let's say شعب وجيش ومقاومة. Let's say, let's try to bring in something here, something there, patch a little bit here, patch a little bit there. And you're not kind of saying, okay, this is not right. We need to correct that, in that sense. And when people did that, it ended up not so well for them in that sense as well. When people engaged the problem heads on, it didn't end well for them, right? So maybe that compromise is necessary. Maybe, I don't know.
But let's go with the thought that it's not. You've taken me to a place I've never been before, which I enjoy. Let's assume that the foundation is flawed, like you alluded to, which is the national pact, the double negation. And I've heard that expression before. Let's just say that the starting point is in itself a bad compromise, or maybe not a bad compromise, but it's a compromise that did not work. It inevitably did not yield a prosperous, independent, sovereign state. It yielded the Lebanon that we're familiar with. And even the agreements in between, which are repetitive, these patchwork ideas, the Ta'if Accord is an agreement on itself.
We've had the same thing in 1958. There were people close to the Baghdad Agreement, people close to the Syrian Egyptian unity and all of that, and you had that schism. But back then it was resolved fairly quickly. But let's say had that. Yeah.
Right. But let's say that all these agreements did not reach us to where we want, and that we're watching a country that just cannot stand on its own 2 feet. From a Pacific point of view, if compromise is not the solution, which is in itself the most Pacific way to handle a problem, what is the starting point? And I think you said, and I hope I got you right, that you said it's enough compromise. Now we need to kind of focus on something else. What is that something else that none of us know yet? And even in terms of the protest movement, in terms of the regime, in terms of everything, all the dynamics in Lebanon, Hezbollah, everything. What is the way out? If it's not compromise, what is the way forward?
Yeah, I'm sorry to say this is not something that can be resolved internally, because it's not like I'm talking specifically about the Hezbollah weapons, because this is an issue that splits the Lebanese, right? Like, there are many issues. There are corruption and everything else. I think corruption can have solutions. There are solutions for corruptions, I believe, in my opinion. But the Hezbollah weapon is a regional thing that can only be resolved regionally.
Is that a regional compromise that ends up like the Cairo Agreement, where a regional idea puts Lebanon into chaos and war, or is it something that may actually benefit Lebanon this time around? Because I'm trying to get at what would work today in 2020 that didn't work in 1970, 50 years ago, when you had enough similar dynamics at stake.
I'm not sure. Do you think? Let me put the question back at you. Do you think there is a solution to that? What's your view of it?
You're smart.
Because I personally don't.
Well, you're smart, and that's because nobody's done this yet. I've done almost 170 episodes. No one's flipped the questions back on me. So good job.
No, because you might have good ideas. I'm sure you've thought of the issue, right?
Well, you should start your own podcast and then have me as your first guest. I'll share my own thoughts right away. I kind of run into a wall that and I find myself sounding like a broken record player, and I don't know if it's an appealing thing when you keep trying to express an opinion that is widely either not shared or not seen the same way. And if it's shared, it's shared with enough reluctance and hesitation that it's just sort of it's a lost cause. And I'll try to explain. I don't think that the easy things, and in my opinion, the easy things in Lebanon are very difficult. That includes accountability, which you just alluded to, corruption in all its facets, in every way possible. Not simple, easy sort of nepotism or crony capitalism. I'm talking every stage of corruption in Lebanon, and the whole system stinks. That for Lebanon, I think, is one of the easier problems to fix. And this includes, by the way, the trash crisis that was never solved. This includes environmental problems that we've grown up with, and now many of us are sick with, and all the things.
But see, I'm sorry to cut you. I don't think these are problems in themselves. I mean, if you find the right system, you can fix this in 5 years. There wouldn't be any trash. There wouldn't be any, you know.
Right, and I exactly, and I think even in terms of simple things like the mountain quarry, these sort of majestic views that are destroyed, all the things that we know about Lebanon, and also just every single problem, traffic, transportation, I don't think they can be solved unless you return to the crucial point of 1969. And that's part of the reason why I was curious about your view on that agreement, because I think that is the last time Lebanon worked. And it may not have been a great arrangement. It had its problems, clearly. There was violence before. I mean, 1958, there was a mini civil war in the country. People died in Lebanon due to many problems: civil unrest, civil strife, regional problems, and all the nostalgia for Ed Sheb. I think if we grew up under his rule, we probably would have protested him and gotten arrested.
For sure.
Yeah. So even the guy that we kind of we look to him as the champion, he would have been a difficult president to live under. But even that...
I don't like his system too much, but I mean, it worked. Right?
I mean, this kind of... Lebanon's version of mukhabarat in the early 1960s was probably toxic.
And he centralized power too much. He made it kind of bulletproof. And this is... Maybe we're still dealing with that today.
But we look now, and we kind of look at him as somebody who kept the country together. Now, that's something that you can work with. You can challenge that. And your centralization, you can express an opinion that may not resonate among some, but it may among others. Decentralization. You could go as far as saying federalism if you want. You can all these kinds of issues that should be on the table. And maybe some are better ideas, some are worse. Maybe some are just romantic and don't work. But all that aside, I don't think we can fix the basic structure without tackling a sub-state group that can circumvent and in a way tell the state how to behave and behave to its benefit, rather than the reverse, which is a group that is part of the Civil War era, a group that fought in the Civil War, a group that maybe was popular to a point even until 2000. That's 10 years after the war ended. Is still in its Civil War stage and has strengthened and gotten stronger over time and is now more powerful than the state. And that to me is that's the issue. Because even if it's an unpopular issue, and even if it's too big to tackle, and I think you said that in a way that it's a regional problem, it's not a Lebanese problem, but then the focus should be on the regional problem. Because I want to live in a Lebanon that works. And I'm 100% agreeing with you here. Violence. I would be the first person to stand up against any form of violence, especially when it comes to challenging that kind of group, because we know what the consequence of violence is in Lebanon. We know that that's militia against militia, and we know that looks terrible at the end, and it costs many lives, and it's not worth it.
For sure.
Yeah,
we've done it before, right? We know
we've done it before.
It's something
Exactly.
we've done.
But I still think that if it's a problem beyond Lebanon's control, then it should be tackled regardless. I guess that's the wall that I always run into, which is...
To tell you the truth, I told you I don't see a problem because the only one who can delegitimize the use of weapons are the supporters of that group.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can force your opinion. It will create further division, because I've had Twitter exchanges, right?
Those are the most, yeah.
which are probably, and I've had live exchanges, but in live exchanges, usually not everything is said because there is that kind of mask people wear.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There is this, while on Twitter it's pure emotions, pure rugged. In most cases.
Would you like to put a mask on now so we just pretend it's not you talking and we can? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah. No, I know.
Listen, I tell things as they are.
Right.
If someone doesn't like them, he doesn't like them, right? But if he thinks I'm wrong, he can say I'm wrong. In Twitter, you see the worst in people, right?
Yeah.
From me
Sure.
from everyone else. Like,
yeah.
While in social relationships, there are these social norms that we are accustomed to, and things are damped down. So, going from that perspective, I've had exchanges on Twitter which are raw, kind of.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking to an anonymous, then there's nothing, right? Like,
sure.
You're talking to someone who has nothing to lose. He says it. He says the worst thing, no consequences, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And so.
Or biggest consequence, you get blocked, and then the conversation ends. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of that's it. That's what you're dealing with. And I've seen a lot of people who really believe that this weapon is very legitimate. It is the solution. You cannot touch it. You shouldn't touch it. If you're touching it, you're a traitor. And they really believe that. And there are many Lebanese who believe that. Now, I believe differently. How are we going to come to a solution? How is it possible to come to a solution? I mean, yes, I can talk to you all day and say this is how societies are, this is how developed countries are, where the government has all the weapons and the decision making and the social contract and all of that. We can say it and repeat it, and we've been repeating it. But does that resolve the problem? This is why I'm telling you I'm not too optimistic about it. And the only way it can be done is either through the supporters of that group kind of agreeing with us, which I don't see right now, or the support for that group, regional support for that group is not there anymore, and that group is kind of forced to sit down and do some, and kind of talk about it at least.
So actually, maybe there's 2 points here I want to get into. And I thank you for letting me kind of get deeper and deeper into this issue, because I think it's important and it's not discussed enough, because I know for probably the right reasons, people are more concerned about their wallet, about their bank account, about food. Sure. So this conversation, I think, maybe rightfully doesn't stick all the time, and so I that's just maybe an important point that
and that's a separate problem, right? That we have a different problem.
Right, and that probably speaks to the moment too, that the focus really is on the individual well-being and society itself. But I'm going to, with that said, I'm going to try to get 2 points sort of covered. Either a regional agreement, which I'm guessing that sounds like Iran and Saudi Arabia and other countries too, perhaps hosting a summit on Lebanon and getting maybe the Americans and the Russians on board, and just maybe it's all done in Geneva. Who knows?
I think this is too simplistic. I personally believe that Hezbollah is very important for Iran, and it's nothing to be had in Geneva or whatever. It's not like that. I don't see it like that.
So what is the regional solution then to that group's weapons in Lebanon? If it's not a summit where countries agree to leave Lebanon out of their problems, well, what is it?
A regime change in Iran might do it.
I see.
A compromise between maybe the United States and Iran about giving Iran, but that also, like, Israel is not going to accept Iran having nuclear weapons, and in that sense, the USA will not accept it. So that's out of the table, right?
So the regional agreement is not necessarily a non-violent way forward. It could be its own kind of. It may be not directly related to Lebanese affairs, but it could be an unrest that puts weapons in Lebanon on the radar. Because I get regime change in Iran is sort of there's always sort of that sort of there's always low level unrest with the regime, but a proper regime change would be a very violent. Is that?
Yeah, that's my neighbor doing some work. I'm sorry.
No, okay. I thought it was. I thought I thought we got hacked in the episode, and now your Twitter enemies are. Okay, well, they're doing a good job.
Back to the regional thing.
Yeah.
every country does, every regime does what's in his interest, right? Put yourself in whoever has control in Iran, right? What can you get to compromise that strong thing you have with Hezbollah? It has to be very, very, very big, extremely big.
Yeah,
it's not going to be sitting on a table with someone for some, okay, remove some sanctions here, add some sanctions there. I mean, yeah, they might agree on things, but under the table, we know it's not a real thing. So you have to think in that perspective.
Right. So okay, but
this is why I'm telling you, the solution is, for me, it's not going to happen. Not now, anyways.
But there's that other scenario, which is the average supporter,
right,
sees Hezbollah's weapons as problematic. Not the group, not necessarily even the politics of the group when it comes to Lebanese affairs, that they see weapons as problematic. Are the solutions in the protest movement that we're still seeing in Lebanon, where that they are tackling all the issues at once and they're putting corruption as the most important problem? Within that, the economic problems, the political problems, and all the problems that kind of fall in. Is that the way forward? Where you can then kind of begin the process of engaging? Because those problems impact all Lebanese. And there was a point in time in October and November where it seemed like most Lebanese, if not all, and not all, but there was an overwhelming majority of Lebanese that saw the system they were living in as inefficient, corrupt, and that needs to be either fixed or removed altogether. That includes Hezbollah supporters. So is the solution in that sort of pool of ideas, or is it something beyond that?
There's a theory which is if you do get power, let's say, in central government and remove whoever needs to be removed through elections or whatever, are you really solving the problem? I mean, now let's go into a philosophical discussion about this. I personally am against single party rule in that sense, and even the well-intentioned people, when they get into power, you never know what you're gonna get. It's a Pandora's box.
Absolutely.
I call for decentralization just from the sense that when you diversify power and when you diffuse power, you're kind of splitting the problem into many small pieces.
Right.
And there's no single decision maker that if he does the wrong decision, he's taking everybody with him in the wrong direction. And
right.
And this is why I think it might work in Lebanon. Now, the problem with that solution is that many Lebanese feel that it's you're segregating people. But if you do it not through a sectarian division, through a geographical division, or through what we have in Ta'if as municipal decentralization, but a stronger one where municipality would really have power to take decisions, even maybe legislative decisions. You can work through that system and you can remove corruption without having the danger of someone getting power in central government and that someone having full capacity. It can go in a devious way, right? If he does, I don't know, if he goes and sleeps with Hezbollah on this, it might be a very, very bad situation for someone like me who would say, okay, bye Lebanon, and
right.
You know what I'm saying? So you have that danger.
But decentralization is something that I've seen mostly on Twitter, that kind of a bit of an echo chamber, maybe, that it's kind of everyone that believes in it sharing that, and whenever there's someone that disagrees, it's like a community attack. So I mean,
it's a divisive idea, because when it was brought during the war, it was brought in a sense of partition and things like that. Well, this is the last thing. I personally, I'm not sure, maybe many people demanding decentralization wants that, maybe. But I personally do not want that. I would refuse that, right?
But decentralization, is that the solution to any problem that we experience in this regard in terms of sub-state weapons? So I'll ask you in this different way.
It won't resolve the weapons issue. This will not
Right,
resolve the weapons
right.
issue.
Okay, so but I'm going to this mental gymnastics since we've kind of entered the sort of the hypothetical
The forbidden
stage,
land.
the forbidden land. Yeah, and you know what? I think this time in life, it's okay to kind of detach a bit because what we're seeing is just misery. I mean, yeah, I'm entering a curfew in about I think an hour or two. So even being under curfew in New York is for all the wrong reasons. You know, all that we're seeing. I kind of like to sort of detach as much as I can. So thank you for letting me kind of go with you into this world of distant ideas. Decentralization, the perfect way to detach from the problem, literally.
No, actually, in my opinion, it resolves many issues.
Okay, but
let me hear what you want to say.
Yeah, I want to ask you about 1969. You have a regional understanding that South Lebanon will become a battlefront against Israel, and the PLO, Arafat, will be dislodged from Jordan within months, and sort of they will operate from Lebanon, and 5 years later, we have civil war. And even in the 5 years in between, things were degenerating quickly. So there's that, right? Decentralize that story. A different Lebanon, that's not the Lebanon that we know or we've read about. Does that make it less appealing for a sub-state group to operate? Or is it irrelevant altogether? It's just shielding some, whether it's communities or geographies, from a wider regional problem. I'm trying to get into what exactly is the benefit of a decentralized system when it comes to that issue.
I'm tackling decentralization from a point of view of removing corruption and when you remove corruption, you might on the long term remove that part of regional interference and whatever. So that's the link.
I see.
It won't have an immediate effect for sure, but in the sense that when communities feel that they have some sort of protection, and Lebanon is a bunch of minorities who, many of them like the Druze, the Maronites, if they're out, they're out. There's no more Druze or Maronites. That's it. It's their existence. It's the existence of that community, right? So you can feel how tense things might be when it comes to how they perceive their own fear. And that fear has been played on. When you decentralize, a geographic decentralization, not a Maronite state, not a Druze state, a geographic decentralization. Most people, first of all, will start voting based on, okay, I voted for Rani. What did Rani do to me? Okay.
Please take your vote back. Don't.
Do I have a good road? Is the trash picked up? Do I have 24 hours electricity? These will become the crucial voting points because you have diffused that kind of existence, that kind of, they're out to get us. The Sunnis are out to get us. The Maronites are out to get us.
Right.
You kind of diffuse that because you've diffused power, because you've diffused the fiscal policy, because you have a decision on your own. And I repeat, from a geographical point of view, I don't think whoever's living in Kisrwan versus whoever living in Jbel and a decentralized thing, he would look at, like, the citizen of Jbel would look at Kisrwan. He would see, okay, it's more developed than me. Why? Why is whoever I voted for not doing his job? More than, the Kisrwanis are out to get you, because, they're not. It's, what I'm kind of saying? So you're kind of shifting the focus of the problem from that kind of fear that's always injected by the leaders, by the politicians, that fear to keep the troops, to keep the troupeau. What's the troupeau? To keep the group in line, kind of.
Right. But that's you're looking at a local solution for a regional problem. If I understood you right.
Yeah. This is why I said this will not resolve the Hezbollah problem. It wouldn't have resolved the PLO problem, but it would have resolved the confessional fighting because of Hezbollah problems or because of PLO.
And that makes the Lebanese state
because what kind of brought us to war? It was part of the Lebanese feeling. Another part of the Lebanese have advantages. They have, it was that they used the PLO as a kind of struggle against It was the black movement against the, you know what I'm saying, against the. It's kind of, in that sense, it's kind of fear infused with feeling unprivileged, feeling that you don't have what you deserve. Did
you just link?
Oh no, let's not go there.
Did you just do this? You found a way to do it.
No, I'm trying to point out that minorities can be affected by that kind of fear, you know. If I'm part of minority, regardless if you believe in the religion of that minority or not, you belong to a group.
Yeah.
And if as belonging to a group, and maybe I'm going to diverge a little bit, maybe the Hezbollah supporters feel that fear from Israel.
Okay, but let's say these. I mean, because it's something that I always read up on. I follow it, and I see it as that kind of. It's an issue that's never properly put in the front of the. Yeah. So, a decentralized Lebanon, is it still the same way of power sharing?
It's very different.
Okay,
very different in the sense that, first of all, the problem now. Let's tackle the corruption thing. The problem now is you have 5, 6, 20 people who control all the decision making. Okay, it's the religious leaders, it's the party leaders, it's that few people, and the rest
could be even
if you're an MP, if you're a minister, whatever, you're just following what these people are.
They're probably all on two hands. I mean, we know who they are.
Exactly. And to pass any single law, any single thing, you have to go through these discussions and back and forth, and it's never the law you want because it's been stripped out to suit the consensus, to suit the compromise. We go back to the compromise. And so if you decentralize, you're having different entities taking different decision making. You know, if Nabatiye wants to have its own electrical network, it doesn't need to compromise with everybody else to get that electrical network. If they need to build, I don't know, I'm putting things very simple here, but if they want to build the Disneyland, they don't have to go and build 3 Disneylands because the Disneyland's for the Shias, the Disneyland for, you know, they take the decision and run with it. If the people in Nabatiye feel that Disneyland is a crucial point to their economy and to their well-being, they will vote for it. If not, they'll vote against it. If they don't vote for it and the project is not done the way it was promised to be done, whoever took that decision will most likely be voted down.
So it's decentralized. Decentralization removes the disadvantages of compromise.
Exactly.
Okay.
In that sense.
That's interesting. So you no longer need to find the sort of the
equilibrium kind of,
because that equilibrium
you have guarantees in the sense that you're no longer in danger because you're taking your own decisions. You're that leader cannot blame ما خلونا نشتغل because it's you have full power in that kada or whatever, however you want to define it. It doesn't matter, however you want to do it. But in that entity you have power. It's your decision, it's not someone else's decision. You cannot blame it on someone else, you know. So you're gonna face the voters when the voters
right. But okay, let's say there's an unhealthy inertia or equilibrium where that's just where Lebanon usually finds itself for a period of time before it enters a phase of conflict and then reemerges in a new farm. It's kind of a very slow, lethargic medium ground where all of these figures or and maybe in different eras, different communities, and today maybe it's a dozen or whatever, 15 people that need to kind of
get together, agree.
And let's say that's never long term and it doesn't work. A decentralized version of Lebanon, how could it emerge without getting into the sensitivities and friction and perhaps low-level violence, if not outright violence, of communal struggle? Because I want to know how it looks literally, because I know it's a topic that people do say it regularly. It doesn't have to be along confessional lines, and it wouldn't make sense to make it on confessional lines, especially in a country like Lebanon where nothing can be drawn that way. So it doesn't there's no map for that. But what does the map look like? And let me ask you in a very direct way: is, for example, Tripoli? is the borders of Tripoli, are they drawn in a way to make sure that there's enough Christians in that zone? Or is it something where you're trying to literally just isolate a city, even if it's 95% Sunni today? It's okay, that's Tripoli, we'll focus on Emyun. And Emyun will be its own little sort of circle. Yeah. I'm trying to see, like, what does that look like? Or is Gharta forced to join one of the two, or is it divided in half? I mean,
this is the complex part, because to do that system, you would need those 20 people in power to agree on it, right? It's not going to happen.
Those 20 people, but also, I don't know what it looks like in terms of these communities. Do they have a say in where they vote and how they vote and which zone they're in? Because it's very difficult for me to see it.
If you do it, like in the United States, if you're not happy in New York, you can always move to Michigan in that sense. I mean, I'm simplifying things.
Okay, so it's more like a American federal...
Because on many issues, on most issues, the problem is not really confessional.
Right, exactly.
It's made to look like that.
Sure.
To look like that. I'm sure that I share a lot more with someone from another confessional than I don't know how to express this. But
no, I know exactly what you're saying. I know.
I think I'll get along more with you than my neighbor Rabia. You know what I'm saying? In that sense, there's no Rabia. I made it up.
Maybe Rabia is a good guy. Who knows? Haram Rabia. Rabia.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, problems are made to look confessional because that's the way to keep power. That's the way to kind of keep that fear.
Yeah.
That's the way, right? And so I don't think when you have local decision making, when you have movement is free, and movement would probably not be confessional. It'll be more out of convenience, out of someone, okay, I like that, I like Kasserwan better than Jbel, or I like Tripoli.
So we're getting rid of also...
You have problems in the sense that what if a minority in a Qada, for example, let's say you do it on a Qada basis, a minority in a Qada is under a regime that it doesn't agree with and is kind of forced to move. So you have that moral hazard.
Yeah.
I agree. That's a negative point that you can fairly make.
And they no longer feel welcome in their home.
But that's kind of based on the assumption that the majority would choose a system it's kind of we're preconceiving things.
Yeah, that's true.
So you're kind of preconceiving that Kasserwan will be this, Maronite kind of fascist, uncompromising.
Okay. So yeah, but no. Okay.
Tripoli is kind of that Salafist, or we're kind of saying things that are not really there. I don't think they're really there.
I 100% agree with you, and I think it's Shia living in Jbel is from Jbel and probably thinks of Jbel as
hometown, right?
Almost everything. Yeah. And I mean, somebody from a Christian from Merjayun is literally from the south and identifies with it in a way that wouldn't resonate in Jbel. So there's that. I mean,
And actually, fundamentalism, let's put it that way, fundamentalism will be rejected by the community itself, I believe.
Yes, no, I agree with you. And I think fundamentalism is diminished when you have that kind of every community has its own minority that they are protecting. It's almost like a local willingness to shield and protect. And I think in Lebanon, I can see that.
It happens when your back is against the wall, but when you have kind of control.
But I guess what I'm asking is maybe I'm not saying it the right way. Is it so localized that you would have potentially 100 states in Lebanon? Because I'm trying to see, is it drawn in a way that every village has its own authority, or is it drawn in a way that's designed so that every let's say majority community has its own minority community? What exactly?
For me, I mean, I think the Qada thing will make sense. It's 26 Qada that are already there.
They're already there. So you want
So you just assign more power to whoever.
So there's no need to necessarily redraw those boundaries.
No, that's my point of view. Someone
Yeah,
else
of
might
course,
have something
of course.
better. Someone else might have something ridiculous, right? I mean, it's things to be debated. But if we're not accepting the concept from the get-go, then there's no need even to go there, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Lebanese need to at least say, okay, that might be a good idea, which I think, right? I think it's a good idea. Maybe another idea is a good idea, but I haven't seen one which makes sense to me in any case. But because I live in Canada, right? I pay taxes to the city, to the province, to the state.
You live in Qada, Quebec, right?
Qada, Quebec, Medinat, Montreal.
Medinat, Montreal. So in Lebanon it would be Qada Kisserwen, I guess.
For example. So if you're living in Juni, you pay taxes to Juni, you pay taxes to Kisserwen, you pay taxes to the central state.
Right.
The central states, of course, would have the decision on the army, defense, foreign.
And that does
these
not,
things would remain at the central state. But at least, you've made the central state very small. Right? Very small in the sense that you don't have 200,000 employees, half of them not working, half of them working. When that becomes a part of the Qada, it's more micro, it's more manageable. People know who's working there and who's not working there. You know what I'm kind of saying?
Absolutely. But let's say this is a classic example of state reform. You're trying to find a way that the Lebanese government can work better for its citizenry. It's a very basic need, and Lebanon needs it desperately. State reform. And
that's from the corruption point of view.
Absolutely, and you said many things that I can imagine in a way, and I see them as working better than what we have. And I know that this does not.
They might not. I'm not saying this is the truth. They might not, right? But this is something I think works, right?
Okay,
I've seen it.
Sure. I mean, let's go with the bet that what we have now is probably one of the worst arrangements possible.
It's not working. What we have is not working.
And let's test it out and see that it doesn't dissuade somebody from the north from moving to Kisserwen if they see Kisserwen as a better government per se, local government. Also doesn't prevent somebody in Kisserwen from leaving if they're not happy with the situation.
Right.
So there's almost like a natural competition among provinces to lure in the most sort of talented technocrats, if you will. I put these in quotes. Basically, that there's a governance that suits the average citizen. Let's just go with that. You also said at the same time it doesn't tackle the national army issue because that's a federal level issue. That's a sort of you can't sort of currency and weaponry are left to a sort of unified body. Can state reform even start in Lebanon without addressing those fundamental things that would link all the provinces together? Because if we're not, let's say this is the way forward, wouldn't you need to start from the top at least and saying that we have a unified system we all agree to, and now we're going to decentralize and leave it to local administrations? Or is it the other way?
What you're giving to local administrations is not I don't like the word dividing, because you're not really dividing. You still have you still have a central government. You still have your borders. It's still Lebanon. You still have the army. You still have. What you're doing is you have a pot of $10 billion a year, let's say, where you're spending it.
Yeah.
And now that pot is 500 million per 20 entities, or 400 million per 20 entities,
right.
And then the central government would have its share. Its share. So you're kind of micromanaging how you're spending that stuff. So that, in my opinion, would deal with corruption. You might still have a Qada that's corrupt, but you would definitely have Qadas less corrupt.
Okay,
so that deals with that part of the issue.
But can we get there? Can we get there while there's an army and sub-state group that would
prevent it from happening?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the challenge. It's can you convince enough Lebanese to ask for it? Right. That's the thing.
Right.
I've seen voices in the wilderness from known people. Right. Would it become prophecy? I don't know.
These are probably the same voices that I find them. They're all on Twitter. They just kind of they
Yeah,
meet and they
I've seen
converse.
it discussed outside of Twitter as well. I mean, Twitter echoes out, right?
Yeah, that's
Social
true.
media echoes out.
You're right.
It's
But
not all the Lebanese on Twitter. I'm
no,
sorry.
but I want to. I'm just the. Let, is this an idea that you see resonating among the average protester, where could be a political platform? Because I don't
Yeah,
see that as I see it so detached from what's happening that it's almost like it's meant to be only a theoretical assumption, and that
I
might
understand.
yeah, and
Yeah,
I'm not sort of I'm not discriminating against the idea. I just mean in terms of where the youth is on the streets of Beirut and this discussion. Is there any
yeah.
sort of overlap?
No, to be pragmatic, to tell you the truth, it's very far from
Mm.
the common citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very far. Most of the common citizens who would probably ask for it are out of extreme fear because it's kind of,
Right, right.
it's never out of, okay, let's think, is it a good idea? Does it make sense? And I have these ideas not because of Lebanon. I have these ideas because I've seen it work out elsewhere, and this is how I think. I kind of escape from single entities in everything I do in my life, and I diversify, right? That's how I see life. So that's my viewpoint. That's my worldview. And so
Right. Yeah.
I kind of tend to project it on Lebanon and see it. It makes sense absolutely in that kind of. But yes, you have a point. A lot of Lebanese say, "Oh, we reject sectarianism. We want to live as one." But I've seen it since I was born. This is the same speech. It didn't change.
Yeah, exactly.
Every single generation said the same thing. There are,
Yeah.
these photographs of church next to a mosque and let's hug each other.
Yeah.
Sure, excellent. I would love the idea, but is it possible? Is it possible? We've tried it. We have tried. So
Yeah.
let's try a different system that would make it happen.
That gets to the core issue, which is compromise, and you've laid it out wonderfully. That in Lebanon we're so good at compromise that we get nowhere in return. We just kind of get stuck in the same spot over and over, and when there's friction, we eventually reach back to some form of compromise that doesn't work.
And the thing is, Rani, when there is friction, the temple collapses very quickly.
Yes. Now,
That's
no.
the issue.
Okay,
It's
so
not a progressive thing. Yeah,
I completely agree, and I want to maybe let's wrap it up with going back just briefly to the Cairo Agreement,
sure.
which is the quintessential compromise, right? It's Lebanon can handle the Arab-Israeli conflict. Good luck. And yes, 10% of the country will be a battle zone. We'll call it Fatah land, and goodbye Lebanon. That's not compromise. That's not compromise the way I think you and I would understand compromise. That's forced narrative, and that's kind of a subjugation, and that's the destruction of a country. But within that, there was so much communal anxiety and so much sectarian sensitivity. And I don't know what it would have been like in Beirut those years. But
this is why if we go back to 69,
yeah,
I think if you had a better system where it had less fear, it had less tension, it had less, the PLO wouldn't have even been able to be an armed group in Lebanon. I don't believe it would.
So
if you had that
so decentralization tackles corruption but also allays communal fear, where you can have communities that are no longer turning to that as
they
sort
would
of
be more concerned on local issues, I believe. That's my opinion, because you kind of have that guarantee of, you have a certain fiscal autonomy, a certain juridic autonomy, a certain administrative autonomy.
Right.
Whereas if you don't have it, and someone else in central government, you feel that he's taking everybody else with him through the central government, that's where fear starts to kind of, they're taking decisions against me as a compromise. They're writing this in the constitution, or not the constitution, and they passed this law which is against what I believe, as opposed to you're on the local level and you deal with these things on the local level and nobody's taking you where you don't want to go. You know what
I follow you. And you referenced America as an example of a system that would be appealing to you. I'm just going to wrap it up with offering you a direct example. Is it the way that Donald Trump in the White House may say all the things that are off-putting, may even engage in Twitter warfare, and may even encourage some forms of violence on occasion. Whether or not that materializes is something else. But the fact is, Donald Trump on his phone is a very reckless leader, sort of pushing people into sort of a very heightened form of anxiety. Lebanon, America doesn't have confessionalism the way we know it. It doesn't have sectarianism. There are issues that are different, and there is injustice in America, but that's something else. It's a very different story. It's a very different experience. But Donald Trump is not able, even if he says things and even if he wants to, he's unable to actually literally govern New York, whether it's the state or whether it's the city. That there are buffers to that. Now the buffer is not a Druze governor of New York. It's not a Sunni or a Shia mayor. It's a governor in New York and a mayor in New York, and their identities matter less than their actual position, so to speak, where they're from and where they serve and where they see home. Did I get you right on that?
Yeah, exactly. And to wrap it up as well, that would allow you to remove the Sittim Qarrar that we know in Lebanon, that in order to appoint a Muslim, you need to appoint a Christian. You can get away from this because central government is small and it doesn't have the decision making, and you can remove these kind of quotas, which are kind of superficial in my,
There's a lot more that needs to be said in this kind of issue, and if we have a follow-up episode, and actually I'll do two things. If I see the numbers go down, we won't have a follow-up episode. If I see them go up,
block me and say I hijacked the episode. I wasn't supposed to be there.
I'll call Rabia. I'll call your neighbor. I'll see if he wants. No, let's have a follow-up episode on exactly what's at stake, because I think a lot is sort of said without it literally being. I'd like to see a sort of a manual of what this looks like, because then we can get into many things, what a Senate would look like perhaps, or what a different sort of parliament would look like, what exactly elections, and then maybe if it's not municipality, are there local parliaments? I mean, I'm really curious about how this translates long term. And I'll say this, I know that this is an unpopular view among most Lebanese. I know that. Sure. And I think, the fact that I think it's sort of said that it has this, it's tainted by things.
With the war.
It's tainted with the war, yeah. But maybe it's time to look at it without the war lens and look at it sort of as something separate. And I'm really happy. You walked me through many things. You walked me through the dilemma of compromise. You took me into a sort of this new terrain of maybe philosophy in the Lebanese state. And you also kind of gave me the most, I think, objective, neutral take on decentralization and how it translates for Lebanon. And you're very kind with your time. You gave me 45 minutes more of your time than I assumed. So you're very generous with your time. And thank you. I really appreciate this. This was very quick, without much planning. And you did me a big favor by joining the podcast within 90 minutes. So
thank you, Ronnie. And I'd like to tell whoever's watching this episode, just take it from an open mind point of view, right? You don't need to agree with it. Just think if it makes sense. If it doesn't, that's fine. But don't take it as this extreme kind of opinion that I won't even look at, right? I mean, that's my message, I think. And thank you again.
All hate message goes to Waël. All love messages and hearts and likes go to me. That's
no problem. I'll take that.
There's no need for compromise anymore. So let's decentralize the issue. I'll take positive. You can take the negative feedback.
I like that approach.
Well, thank you.
Nice talking to you. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thanks for listening. And a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.